Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. On the outskirts of the Andromeda sector, a cargo ship called the Serapis glided peacefully through the stars, unaware of the danger lurking in the shadows. The crew was small, mostly human, a mix of traders and smugglers, but they had always managed to slip past the radar, avoiding attention. That was until the pirate ship Voxer descended from the nebula. The pirates struck fast, using their advanced stealth technology to cloak their ship, cutting through the Seraphis' defenses before the crew even knew what was happening. The pirates' leader, a ruthless and calculating figure named Zarek, issued orders to board. The humans were caught off guard, helpless against the vicious attackers who knew no mercy. The Seraphis crew was subdued quickly, the pirates taking what they wanted: cargo, weapons, and most importantly, a mysterious passenger. Aboard the Seraphis, there had been an alien woman, a mysterious species with translucent skin, dark purple veins that pulsed with an eerie glow, and eyes like twin black holes. Her name was Lyra, and though no one on the ship knew her origin, she was believed to be a refugee fleeing from the far-off Epsilon Cinder System, a place known for its oppressive regime. She had been seeking refuge in the neutral zone, far from the reach of any government or warlord. But Zarek, with his connections to the galaxy's criminal underworld, knew opportunity when he saw it. Lyra was captured, her serene features now twisted in fear as she was dragged across the Seraphis' deck. She resisted, but the pirates were well trained, and her strength, though impressive for her kind, was no match for their superior numbers. As Zarek approached, a smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. "She's a beauty," Zarek muttered, his eyes gleaming as he assessed the value of his prize. "Worth more than gold." Lyra's pulse quickened, her mind racing. She needed to escape, but there was no way out. She was trapped in the clutches of pirates, her freedom slipping away with each passing moment. The pirates hauled her aboard the Voxer, the doors of the cargo hold sealing behind her with a heavy thud. Her hopes of finding sanctuary seemed all but lost. As Lyra was thrown into the brig, her thoughts turned to the only way she could survive this nightmare: by finding someone who could help her. The universe was vast, and though she was isolated, she wasn't without resources. Deep within the galaxy's digital underbelly, there was a network of individuals who sought to help those in need: refugees, outcasts, and those the galaxy's powerful factions wanted to suppress. It was a place where anyone could seek help, find information, and connect with others in the darkest corners of the universe. That place was Galactic Reddit. Lyra had once heard of it, a vast, almost mythological network where anything could be posted, from news to requests for aid. People communicated across sectors and star systems, sharing ideas, warnings, and even pleas for help. Lyra knew that if anyone could see her plight, it would be there. Meanwhile, on Earth, a human named Jonah sat in his small, dimly lit apartment, his eyes glued to his holoscreen. He was a self-proclaimed galactic explorer on the fringes of the human space colonies. He spent his free time diving into the strange corners of the galaxy's online forums, fascinated by alien cultures and the stories they shared. His addiction was Galactic Reddit, where he followed every thread, from deep space expeditions to strange intergalactic rumors. He had even made a name for himself, posting his own theories about uncharted star systems. That day, Jonah found himself scrolling through the latest posts, feeling the usual boredom setting in. But then something caught his eye. A message titled "Kidnapped by Pirates. Help Needed" appeared on his feed, written by someone named Lyra. At first, Jonah thought it was just another hoax, a fake plea from someone hoping to get attention. But as he read the post, his heart skipped a beat. The story was chilling. Lyra, an alien woman, had been taken by pirates and was being held captive aboard the Voxer. Her plea for help was desperate, filled with emotion, and came with one shocking detail: her coordinates. She knew where she was. Jonah's fingers hovered over the keys, his mind racing. He had always dreamt of doing something extraordinary, of becoming a part of something greater than his lonely existence on Earth. Here was a chance to make a real difference, to actually help someone. The feeling of adventure surged through him, and without thinking, He clicked the message button. "I can help," Jonah typed, his heart pounding as he hit send. "I'll come for you," the message sent. Jonah leaned back, trying to steady his breathing. His mind was already calculating the risks and the rewards. The Voxer was a notorious pirate ship, and Zarek wasn't the kind to let anyone go without a price. Jonah had no real experience with combat or piracy, but his mind worked quickly, and he had contacts in the outer systems. If anyone could navigate this mess, it was him. He knew one thing: he couldn't sit back and do nothing. He couldn't let this woman, this alien, remain a prisoner. Lyra, aboard the Voxer, had no idea that her plea for help had reached Earth, or that a human had responded. But somewhere deep in her mind, a tiny spark of hope flickered. Perhaps she wasn't as alone as she thought. The Voxer was a pirate ship like no other. A massive behemoth of scavenged tech and military-grade weaponry. It hung in the dark corners of space like a predator, waiting for its next victim. Its hull was battered, its weapons adorned with the markings of every stolen faction across the galaxy. Zarek, the pirate lord, ruled it with a mixture of brutality and cold calculation, keeping his crew in line with threats and rewards. No one dared defy him except for Lyra. She had been locked in a small, dimly lit cell at the bottom of the ship, her only company the silence of the deep void outside. The walls were cold metal, the air stale, but Lyra's mind remained sharp. She couldn't afford to fall into despair. Not yet. She had a plan. It had been days since she was taken, and her capture had made her aware of how easily the galaxy's lawlessness could swallow up even the most powerful beings. Yet, it also made her realize something else. She had underestimated her own people. The Epsilon Cinder regime she fled from had taught her how to survive in the most oppressive conditions. But there were other ways to escape, other ways to fight back. She had no weapons, no allies aboard the Voxer, but there were other options. Lyra had learned to control her alien abilities, her ability to manipulate energy, a rare trait in her species. The ability to create small bursts of raw power from her hands, a force that could disorient or stun an enemy. It wasn't much, but it could be enough. Her captors, Zarek included, had no idea what she was capable of, and she intended to keep it that way for now. If she were to escape, she needed to wait for the right moment. Meanwhile, Jonah was already making preparations for his rescue mission. After sending his message, he hadn't heard back from Lyra, but he wasn't going to let that stop him. Time was of the essence. The Voxer was known to make quick, unpredictable jumps through space, and if he didn't act fast, Lyra could be lost forever. Jonah had no experience in rescue missions, no history of battle or pirates, but he had something just as valuable: determination. He had spent hours scouring the galactic Reddit threads, gathering every shred of information he could about the Voxer and its captain, Zarek. He found out that the pirate ship had a reputation for raiding freighters, but it also made frequent stops at deep space refueling stations and black markets. Jonah knew that if he was going to intercept them, it had to be at one of those stops. He took to the galactic map, plotting a course that would bring him to the nearest refueling station, a dilapidated outpost on the edge of the Zexer Nebula. The station was mostly a haven for smugglers and low-tier criminals, but it was perfect for Jonah. It was the kind of place where he could blend in, gather intel, and figure out how to make contact with the pirates without immediately being detected. Jonah had also managed to secure a small, unassuming ship, a retired scout vessel, that he had spent the past few days upgrading with a few basic defensive systems and stealth capabilities. It wasn't much, but it was enough to slip past the radar and get close to the Voxer undetected. His goal wasn't to fight the pirates head-on. It was to get in, find Lyra, and get her out as quietly as possible. As his ship approached the Zexer Nebula, Jonah's thoughts turned to Lyra. What was she like? Was she as beautiful and powerful as the stories said? How could he help her, someone from another species, in a universe so vast and filled with danger? He didn't know the answers, but one thing was clear. He was doing this because it was the right thing to do. The universe was full of injustices, but that didn't mean he had to turn a blind eye to them. And Lyra, wherever she was, needed him. Back on the Voxer, Lyra's opportunity came sooner than she expected. Zarek had grown increasingly paranoid over the past few days. Rumors of a human bounty hunter, a dangerous and skilled operative, had been circulating among his crew. Zarek wasn't sure if it was true, but he wasn't one to take risks. He decided to tighten security, keeping a close watch on his prisoners, especially Lyra. Her unusual abilities were a point of interest for him, and he was determined to extract whatever secrets she was hiding, by force if necessary. Lyra overheard the conversation in the hallway outside her cell. Her sharp ears caught snippets of what the crew was discussing. Something about a human tracker closing in. The thought of a human coming to her rescue filled her with mixed emotions. Hope, yes, but also fear. What if this was just another pirate trick? What if she had already been forgotten? Her plea for help a useless cry into the void. But then, something shifted in her mind. A sudden surge of adrenaline coursed through her veins. The timing was perfect. The security team was distracted, the pirate leader's paranoia giving her the chance she needed. It was now or never. With a quick glance at the door's control panel, Lyra focused. Her fingers glowed with a faint, purple light as she tapped into the ship's energy grid. The Voxer security system was advanced, but Lyra's energy manipulation abilities were stronger than most would guess. She sent a pulse of energy to the door lock, frying the circuits just enough to break the electronic seal. The door hissed open, and Lyra stepped into the hallway, her heart pounding. She didn't know how long she had, but she couldn't waste a single second. The hall was empty, but she could hear the sounds of pirates approaching. She was ready to make her move. And then, a strange noise interrupted the silence. A soft, muffled sound, coming from somewhere deep in the ship. It was a vibration in the hull, faint but persistent. Something or someone was coming. Was it the human Jonah? Lyra couldn't be sure, but she had no choice but to follow the sound. The escape was now in motion. The sound continued, growing louder as Lyra cautiously moved down the corridor. It was a low, rhythmic hum, almost like the engine of a ship powering up. It was too deliberate to be a coincidence. Someone or something was coming. The vibration under her feet told her it wasn't just a random shift in the Voxer systems. This was intentional. With her heart racing, Lyra pressed herself against the cold metal wall, listening intently. She could feel the energy around her crackling, almost as though her body was responding to the situation, heightening her senses. Every footstep, every clink of metal echoed in her ears. The pirates were busy, but Zarek's paranoia had forced them to tighten security. If she was caught now, there would be no escaping. She couldn't afford to be found before she reached her objective. But where was the source of the hum? Was it the Voxer systems or something else entirely? Lyra took a deep breath, focusing on the feeling of energy that surged through her. Her powers were unpredictable, but the desperation of her situation sharpened her concentration. Her translucent skin shimmered faintly as she felt the door at the end of the hallway. It led to the main cockpit, the nerve center of the pirate ship. If she could take control of the Voxer or even just disable the ship systems long enough for an escape, she might be able to survive. But she wasn't sure how much longer her luck would hold out. The hum grew louder still, and then she heard a voice. Report. Status of the prisoner. It was Zarek's voice. Lyra pressed her back flat against the wall, holding her breath. The footsteps were closer now. She dared not move. Sir, she's still in her cell. We've increased patrols near her, a pirate responded. No, not good enough. Zarek's voice was cold, commanding. I want her in front of me. Now, she's too valuable. We can't risk her escape. Not with this human hunter on the prowl. The sound of footsteps grew fainter, but Lyra could still hear the commotion echoing through the ship. They were closing in. Her thoughts spun. There had to be another way out. Then, like a sudden spark in her mind, the source of the hum became clear. It wasn't the ship systems at all. The noise was coming from above her. The ventilation shafts. There was someone or something moving up there. Her pulse quickened. The hum wasn't a random malfunction. It was a signal. Someone was deliberately trying to get through the ship undetected. And then, as if the universe was aligning with her desperate hope, the hum shifted. It grew louder for a moment and then quieted again, signaling the person moving in a different direction. A chance. Lyra had no more time to waste. She had to act now. With swift, graceful movements, Lyra darted down the hallway, making her way toward the main control room. She passed an open door where two pirates stood talking. They didn't notice her until the last possible moment, and by then, her energy manipulation was already at work. She emitted a burst of raw power from her palms, knocking both pirates unconscious. Their bodies crumpled to the floor without a sound. Lyra didn't wait for them to recover. She continued forward, heart pounding in her chest. The control room was just ahead. As she approached, she heard the soft thud of boots on the metal floor. There was no time for subtlety anymore. She needed to act before Zarek realized what was happening. Suddenly, the door to the control room burst open, and Lyra found herself face to face with the pirate captain, Zarek. Going somewhere? Zarek sneered, his cold eyes locking onto hers. He stepped into the room, blocking her only escape route. He was tall, with a muscular frame that exuded strength and authority. His long silver hair was tied back in a tight braid, and his face was etched with scars. There was no mistaking his brutal reputation. "I don't have time for this," Lyra said, her voice sharp with urgency. Zarek laughed, the sound echoing in the narrow space. "You think you can escape me? You're a prisoner aboard my ship. There's nowhere to run." But Lyra wasn't listening. Her mind was already moving, calculating her next move. With a quick, fluid motion, she lifted her hands, her skin glowing faintly with purple energy. Zarek didn't have time to react before she released a burst of force, knocking him backward into the wall. The pirate captain staggered, momentarily stunned. It wasn't a fatal strike, but it was enough to give her a head start. She ran past him, her feet barely touching the ground. Zarek's roar of fury followed her, but she didn't stop. Her goal was the hangar bay, where the escape pods were located. She knew the Voxer's layout well enough to avoid the traps Zarek had set. She was almost there, but then the hum returned. The mysterious vibration was no longer a vague sound from above. It was a presence she could feel in the very air. Someone, or something, was here to help her. She didn't know who it was, but she had to trust that they were on her side. Lyra's hand brushed against a control panel as she sprinted through the corridors. The airlock doors ahead of her slid open. The hangar bay loomed, vast and dimly lit. A lone escape pod sat in the far corner, just waiting for someone to board. As she approached, a figure stepped out from the shadows, a human. His face was familiar in a way she couldn't explain, but there was no time for confusion. It was him, the person who had answered her plea for help. Jonah. He stood there, a strange look of determination in his eyes. Without a word, he gestured toward the pod. Lyra didn't hesitate. She ran toward him, her pulse racing. She couldn't explain how or why this human had come, but she was sure of one thing. He was her ticket out of this nightmare. As she reached him, Jonah spoke for the first time. "We're not out of this yet." And with that, he led her into the escape pod. The door slammed shut behind them, and Jonah immediately began activating the controls. Lyra could feel the ship's tremors as Zarek's crew scrambled to realize what was happening. But it was too late. The pod shot away from the Voxer, hurtling toward the blackness of space, toward freedom. The escape pod rocketed through the void, its engines firing at full thrust as it distanced itself from the Voxer. Lyra felt the sharp lurch as the pod's inertia kicked in, pushing her back against the seat. She gripped the safety harness, her pulse still racing from the encounter with Zarek. She had no idea if the pirates would pursue them, but she couldn't afford to think about that now. She was free for the moment, but the danger was far from over. Jonah sat at the controls, his brow furrowed in concentration. His hands moved quickly over the console, fingers flying across buttons and switches as he initiated evasive maneuvers. The pod was small, but it had the speed and agility to outrun most pirate ships. That was the plan. Get as far away as possible, as quickly as possible. Lyra could feel the weight of the situation settling in. Her mind swirled with 1,000 thoughts. She had been so close to death just moments ago, yet now she was flying toward freedom, with a human she barely knew as her savior. She had never imagined that a human would come for her, certainly not one like Jonah. He was no soldier, no warrior, but there he was, guiding her through the stars. What's your name?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling slightly. It wasn't fear. It was a mixture of relief and awe. "Jonah," he replied, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. "I got your message. You're lucky I saw it before those pirates did." Lyra nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. "I never thought anyone would come. I didn't think I had a chance." She paused, studying him more closely now that they were out of immediate danger. His eyes were determined but kind, his face still carrying the faint trace of someone who had lived through hardship, but who was willing to do whatever it took to help. Jonah didn't respond right away, his attention focused on the controls. The Voxer had likely already started pursuing them, and he needed to plan their next move. But Lyra noticed his fingers trembling slightly as he adjusted the ship's trajectory. She knew he was pushing himself beyond his limits. He was scared, but he was determined to see this through. "You did well," Lyra said, trying to offer him some comfort. Jonah glanced at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Not out of the woods yet, but thank you." He looked back at the controls. "We're almost clear of the Voxer's range. After that, we'll have a bit more time to breathe." Lyra nodded, though the dread still clawed at her chest. The pirates wouldn't stop. Not until they had her back, and not until they had the information she carried. She had to think, she had to focus. The universe was a dangerous place, and now, more than ever, she had to keep moving. A sudden beeping broke the silence, and Jonah's eyes widened in alarm. "They're on us," he muttered under his breath. Lyra stiffened, her alien senses sharpening. She could feel the energy in the air shift. She could sense the presence of the Voxer, growing closer with every passing second. Jonah was right. They weren't out of danger yet. "Can you outrun them?" Lyra asked, her voice urgent. Jonah didn't look at her as he manipulated the controls, but she saw the strain in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the console. "I can try. I've made some modifications to this ship, but they've got more firepower than we do. If we get into a battle, we're done." Lyra's mind raced. She had to act, and fast. The Voxer's crew would be closing in on them, and there was no way they could outrun a pirate ship of that size and firepower indefinitely. She had no weapons, no backup, but she did have one advantage. "I might be able to help," Lyra said slowly, her voice laced with a calm determination she hadn't felt before. Jonah glanced at her, his expression puzzled. "How?" "I have the ability to manipulate energy," she explained, her words measured. "It's something my species can do, though it's not widely known. I can create bursts of energy, force fields, that sort of thing. I can disrupt the sensors on their ship, make it harder for them to track us." Jonah's eyes widened. He had heard of such abilities in passing, rumors, stories about powerful alien species, but hearing it from Lyra herself was something entirely different. "That could work," he said, his voice hopeful. "But how much time do you need?" Lyra glanced out of the pod's viewport, watching the blackness of space stretch out before them. She could feel the growing pressure of the Voxer's pursuit. Zarek wouldn't let them go easily, and the clock was ticking. "I'll need a few minutes," she said, her voice steady. "Hold them off as best you can." Jonah's face tightened with resolve, and for the first time, Lyra saw the true depth of the human's determination. He wasn't just helping her because it was the right thing to do. There was something more. She could sense it in the way his eyes gleamed. He was fighting for something bigger than himself. "All right," Jonah said, his voice firm. "We'll keep them distracted. You do your thing." Lyra took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had never attempted something like this before on a ship in motion. Her power had always been more controlled, more subtle. But desperation sharpened her focus. She reached out, feeling the energy all around her. The pulse of the ship's systems, the hum of the engines, the vibrations of the metal hull. It was a symphony of forces she could tap into. Her hands glowed faintly as she extended them toward the controls, channeling her energy. She felt the flow of power inside her, the crackle of raw force. It took every ounce of concentration to harness it, to direct it without losing control. Outside, Jonah began his evasive maneuvers, swerving the pod in sharp arcs to shake off the Voxer's pursuit. The pirate ship wasn't far behind. Lyra could sense its powerful engines roaring closer with every second. Jonah's voice broke into her focus. "Get ready. They're about to fire." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't let them hit her ship. She reached out further, pulling the energy into her hands, directing it toward the exterior sensors of the pirate ship. She could feel their targeting systems locking onto her. But with a single pulse, she sent a wave of disorienting energy toward the Voxer's sensors, scrambling them, causing them to flicker and malfunction. The pirate ship's targeting system sputtered, and a second later, a blast of energy rocketed past the pod, missing by a hair's breadth. Jonah let out a breath of relief. "Nice shot," he called out. But Lyra didn't let up. She continued to focus, her energy rippling out to cover the Voxer's path, disorienting their systems further. The pirates weren't sure what was happening, but they would soon figure out that they were dealing with more than they bargained for. With each passing second, the gap between the pod and the pirate ship grew, thanks to Lyra's interference. They were on the verge of escaping. But as the distance increased, so did the risk. Zarek would fight back with everything he had. And Lyra knew, deep in her bones, that their journey was far from over. The distance between the escape pod and the Voxer grew, but it wasn't enough. Zarek wasn't one to back down easily, and Lyra could feel his fury building. The pirates were resourceful, and their pursuit would be relentless. Jonah had to move fast. If they didn't make it out of the Voxer's range soon, their window of escape would close. Jonah's hands flew over the controls, guiding the small ship with precision, but there was an urgency in his movements. The pod was designed for speed, but it wasn't a warship, and the Voxer had an entire arsenal of weapons at its disposal. Jonah could sense that time was slipping away. He needed a plan, something to outsmart the pirates, something that would get them to safety without a prolonged fight. "How long until we're clear?" Lyra's voice cut through his thoughts. She had been working in silence, her energy pulses still disrupting the Voxer's targeting systems. "Just a few more minutes," Jonah muttered, his eyes scanning the pod's radar for any sign of a pursuing ship. The Voxer was still behind them, but it was beginning to lose its lock. "We're almost out of their range. I think we're in the clear." Lyra nodded, her hands still glowing faintly as she maintained the energy disruptions. "We need to find a place to hide. We can't just drift out into space without a plan." Jonah was silent for a moment, tapping his fingers against the console. His thoughts raced. "I know a place, an old mining colony. It's off the grid, barely on any star maps. We can lay low there, rest, and figure out our next move." Lyra raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "A mining colony? What's so special about it?" Jonah hesitated, clearly weighing his words. "It's not just a colony anymore. It's a refuge for people who want to disappear. Smugglers, outcasts, survivors. It's a place where no one asks questions." Lyra studied him for a moment, considering his words. There was something in his tone that told her he wasn't just trying to reassure her. There was history there, a reason he knew about this place, a reason he was so certain it would be safe. "Sounds like the perfect place to vanish," she said. "Let's go." Jonah punched in the coordinates, and the pod shifted into a new course, heading toward the uncharted space beyond the reach of the Voxer. The journey was tense, every moment a delicate balance between escaping and being found. The pirate ship was no longer visible on their sensors, but Lyra could still feel its presence, lingering in the space around them. The stars outside seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. There was a sense of isolation, the vast emptiness of space pressing in on them. But as the pod drifted deeper into the unknown, Lyra found that the silence was oddly comforting. It gave her time to think. She glanced over at Jonah, who was staring out of the viewport, his expression focused but distant. She wanted to ask him more about himself, about his past, but the words didn't come. They were both survivors in their own ways, and the time for small talk was long past. Instead, Lyra asked the question that had been gnawing at her ever since she first realized that a human was coming for her. "Why did you help me?" Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. Jonah's gaze flickered toward her, and for a brief moment, she thought he might not answer. But then he sighed, a quiet, resigned sound. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe because I couldn't just sit back and watch. The way things are, people like you don't get many chances. And I'm not the type of guy to let someone suffer when I can do something about it." Lyra studied him carefully. His words were simple, but there was depth in them. He had risked everything to save her. A stranger. She wondered if there was more to his story than he let on. But she didn't press him for answers. They both had their scars, their secrets. The pod jerked slightly as it hit a small gravitational anomaly, and Lyra instinctively gripped the side of her seat. Jonah adjusted the ship's trajectory, his hands steady despite the sudden shake. "Not far now," he said, his voice calm. "We should be able to make it to the colony in one piece." Lyra nodded, relieved to know they were nearing safety, but the tension didn't completely ease. She had been in too many close calls to let her guard down now. They continued in silence for a while, the stars passing by in a steady stream of light. It wasn't until the pod was within range of the colony's coordinates that they encountered another obstacle. A strange signal. Jonah's eyes narrowed as the ship's radar began to beep erratically. "That's not right," he muttered, leaning forward to analyze the incoming transmission. It was a jumbled, distorted signal, faint but unmistakable. Lyra's senses flared. She could feel the energy around them shifting, the subtle vibrations of space seeming to react to the signal. It was something familiar and unsettling. "What is it?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Jonah's brow furrowed. "It's a warning. The colony's in lockdown. Something's gone wrong." Lyra felt a sudden spike of anxiety, her stomach twisting. "Lockdown? What happened?" "I don't know," Jonah said, his voice tight with frustration. "But it's definitely not the welcoming refuge I thought it would be." Before they could process the implications of the warning, the pod shook violently, and an alert flashed across the console. A ship much larger than their own had appeared on their sensors. It was closing in fast. "Pirates," Jonah hissed, his eyes widening. "They followed us." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. There was no way they could outrun another ship of that size. The Voxer had probably sent out a secondary force, and now they were cornered between the unknown colony and a pursuing pirate vessel. The panic began to build, but Lyra forced herself to calm down. She reached for the energy around her, willing herself to focus. She wasn't about to let her freedom slip through her fingers so easily. She had faced worse odds than this. "We have to fight," she said, her voice low but determined. Jonah looked at her, disbelief flashing across his face. "Fight? We're outgunned and we're in a pod. There's no way we can—" "I can create a shield," she interrupted, her hands beginning to glow. "It will buy us time. But you'll need to get us close to the colony. I'll do the rest." Jonah hesitated for a moment, and then, with a grim nod, he punched the controls to steer the pod in the direction of the mining colony. Lyra took a deep breath, preparing herself for the storm to come. Whatever was waiting for them, she wasn't going to back down. The pirates had followed them, but Lyra was done being their prey. The final stretch toward the mining colony felt like an eternity. The looming pirate ship behind them cast a shadow over their path, and Lyra could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Her mind raced, calculating every possible move. They had no more time. If they didn't act fast, they would be caught and dragged back into the pirates' clutches. And this time, there would be no escape. Jonah's fingers flew across the control panel, his face a mask of determination. He didn't speak, but his every movement conveyed the urgency of their flight. They had to make it to the colony's defenses, and quickly. As they drew closer, the shape of the mining station began to take form, an isolated outpost of decaying structures and rusted machinery, far from the bustling trade routes. The colony was designed to be forgotten, a place for those who needed to disappear. But it was no longer a haven. It was a trap. Lyra's hands pulsed with energy, crackling with raw power. She could feel the approaching pirate ship, its presence suffocating, as if the entire vessel was bearing down on her. The signal was unmistakable now. It was Zarek's ship. His pursuit was relentless, but she would not let him win. Not today. They're closing in, Jonah warned, his voice tight with tension. I need to get us closer. Can you hold them off? Lyra didn't answer immediately. Instead, she extended her hands toward the outside of the pod, focusing all her energy on the invisible barrier between them and the pirate ship. She could feel the force field forming, shimmering faintly in the vacuum of space. It would hold for a while, but she had no illusions about how long it would last against the firepower of a pirate warship. I'll create a shield, she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. But we'll need to move quickly. Jonah nodded, trusting her completely. He pushed the throttle, the pod surging forward, its engines humming with the strain of speed. The colony's perimeter was drawing closer. It was a jagged mess of old, half-abandoned mining equipment, with decaying structures scattered across the barren asteroid field. The pirate ship's sensors were likely not expecting any threats here, but Lyra didn't know how long they would remain unchallenged. It was their only shot. The pirate ship fired first, a massive blast of plasma that struck the pod's shield with a deafening crack. Lyra gritted her teeth as the force slammed into her, her hands trembling from the effort of maintaining the barrier. The shield held, but the impact had sent shockwaves through the pod, knocking Jonah off course for a split second. Hang on, Jonah shouted, fighting against the sudden turbulence as he corrected the pod's trajectory. The pirate ship followed closely behind, its weapons charging for another blast. Lyra's body pulsed with energy. She reached deep inside herself, drawing on every ounce of power she had left. She felt the shield grow stronger, more resilient, even as it threatened to shatter from the barrage of fire. The pirate ship wouldn't stop. They needed to reach the colony, where there might still be some defenses left. I'm almost there, Jonah grunted, his hands gripped tightly on the controls. Just hold on a little longer. Lyra closed her eyes, steadying her breath. She could feel the pirate ship's energy signatures as they charged up for another shot. Her shield was wearing thin. She had to act now. With a sharp intake of breath, Lyra released a pulse of energy, a focused burst that surged outward, rippling across the space between them and the pursuing pirate ship. The blast hit the pirate ship's hull, sending a shockwave that destabilized its targeting systems. The ship staggered slightly in space, its weapons firing wildly in every direction. For a brief, precious moment, it was disoriented. Jonah didn't hesitate. He angled the pod toward the mining colony, pushing the pod's speed to its limits. The colony's battered defenses began to flicker to life as they neared, the old, rusted turrets slowly swiveling to face the approaching threat. Please, don't fail me now, Jonah muttered under his breath as the pod passed the colony's outer perimeter. The pirate ship had regained its stability, but they were so close now. Jonah's knuckles turned white as he fought against the pod's flight path, guiding it toward a docking bay nestled within the colony. The pirate ship wasn't far behind. A loud whir filled the pod as its proximity alarms screamed. The pirate ship had launched several smaller vessels in pursuit, and they were closing in fast. It would take only moments before they fired their deadly weapons once more. Lyra's pulse quickened. She couldn't wait any longer. She focused every bit of her remaining strength into her hands, summoning the last of her energy to create a massive energy burst. A final, desperate push that would disrupt the pirate ship's weapons and shields. The sheer intensity of the pulse lit up the surrounding space, a blinding flash that sent ripples through the vacuum of space. The pirate ship's forward cannons fired, but the blast had thrown their trajectory off. The shot missed by a wide margin. Jonah pushed the pod into the colony's docking bay, the pod's metal frame scraping against the rough walls of the station. He didn't wait for the ship to fully dock before he was already unstrapping himself, rushing toward the door. Get out, he shouted to Lyra. Lyra stumbled out of her seat, dizzy from the exertion. Her energy was nearly spent, but she didn't have time to rest. They were still under threat. She had no idea what the pirate ship was going to do next, but she had a feeling Zarek wasn't going to give up that easily. They ran down the narrow, dimly lit corridor of the colony's docking bay, the sound of the pirate ship's engines still ringing in their ears. Jonah led the way, but Lyra could hear the distant echo of footsteps behind them. The pirates were already closing in on the station, but the colony's defenses had kicked in. The once-forgotten mining station was coming alive, lights flickering to life as dormant security systems activated. The air was thick with tension. The doors to a small armory slid open, and Jonah pulled out an old, battered weapon. A plasma rifle that looked as if it had seen better days. "You ready?" Jonah asked, his voice strained but resolute. Lyra nodded, her energy reserves nearly drained, but her resolve was unbreakable. Ready, the pirates would be here soon. But this time they would not be the prey. Jonah stepped forward, gripping the rifle tightly. Let's show them who's hunting who. The final stand had begun. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stellar HFY content. Ring that bell to stay updated, and we'll see you next time.